Alô. Да се ничего не слышу. Do we hear each other? Do we hear each other?
Hi, good morning, everyone from Puerto Rico.
To je taka dosti dobra pogruntavščina, da se da kaj videti. Do zdaj to zmeri funkcionira.
Še bo. To je test.
Po moje, ja. Smo pa zdaj pripravljali tak talking point za soboto. Neugodno.
Ja, neugodno, ja. Kako razumem, neugodno.
Ker iz tega se bo razvila, ja. Taka dosti divja zgodba v
Politična igra.
Ja.
Mislim, če bomo mi zdaj to začeli pogajati z arbitražo, smo že korak nazaj.
Ne, če bomo mi zdaj kakorkoli, ne.
S čimkoli to pogajati nazaj.
To sem jaz povedal našemu kolegu, sem rekel, glej, dragi moj, Sašo,
Good afternoon, and I welcome you to this public discussion. Around 6 months ago, we were in a very similar scenario setting to discuss the priorities of the German presidency of the Council of the EU. And 6 months later, we're here again now to discuss the achievements and results of this presidency, and also to see what the future holds in the next 12 months. First of all, I would really like to welcome Honourable Minister Everest Balciolo, Minister for European and Foreign Affairs, Minister Abela, Minister within the Office of the Prime Minister, also responsible for MUSAC, and His Excellency the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany. I would like to also welcome the Slovenian and the Portuguese ambassador who are with us via Zoom, and we will also have the opportunity to discuss with them later on, given that both Portugal and Slovenia will take over the presidency of the Council in 2021. I would also like to say a warm welcome to all the ambassadors who also joined us in this discussion today, and other participants who are following us both on Zoom and Facebook. And I would like immediately to start the discussion with you, Ambassador. I mean, they have been a very busy 6 months. There's a lot of activity, even if we see just a couple of days ago with the European Council, there was finally the agreement on the new multi-annual financial framework. We also saw, for example, the Council agreeing on very ambitious climate action targets. All this happening while we are still in the middle of a pandemic, which I think we can all agree it has really not just affected the lives of European citizens, but also the European economy. If you really had to sum up, let's put it that way, I know we have a very short, limited time, so, but if you really had to sum up the conclusions, or let's say the achievements of this presidency, what would they be?
I think we have achieved a lot in favor of the European citizen, and we are all European citizens, so it's in our own interest as well. You mentioned the main topics already. We, after all, with the help and the constructive support of all partners, we managed to achieve an agreement on the multi-annual financial framework, including the rule of law aspect, which of course is crucial to all of us, because all of us, all the 27, believe in the rule of law as a constituent of our community. I'm very pleased to see that also the two members who were critical how the rule of law was to be applied and enacted could be brought on board, and I think that was a huge success. You mentioned climate, 55% CO2 reduction towards the year 2030. A minimum reduction, we have to say. We could be more ambitious if we manage to do that compared to 1990. That's a very ambitious aim, and again, I think the formula that has been found is a very wise and a very constructive one. While we all should be firmly committed to this figure, at the same time, the Council conclusions stipulate that the situation of each and every member state will be taken into account. Member states, while they are bound by this target figure, will remain totally in charge of their energy mix, how they produce energy domestically, how they will achieve this target. And this is very important because each and every member state is starting from a different point. And perhaps important for Malta that it's expressly mentioned in the Council conclusions that we are fully aware of the special situation of island states. So even the concerns of Malta are taken into account. And in order to be able to bring that about, I have to revert to the question of the budget, because 30%, especially of the new generation EU fund of 700 billion euro alone, has to be dedicated to the whole green topic, to climate and other things. So I think preconditions are very good. And finally, what nobody could have expected and envisaged when we prepared for this presidency basically beginning about a year ago was, of course, the pandemic, which has taken the EU to a test that nobody could have imagined even a year ago. And I think, again, the success is focused on the EU citizen, because the EU has made sure that as soon as a vaccine will have been approved during the last days of this year, vaccination in all member states can start. And I repeat, in all member states, there will be an even and fair distribution of the vaccine doses, so that, again, nobody will be left behind, and we'll all be hopefully safe rather sooner than later. So I think for the individual European citizen, we have achieved as much as we possibly could.
Ambassador, you mentioned the issue of the pandemic, and during, as you said, we're now seeing some light with the vaccine and everything. What do you think are the factors that should really dominate now the next few months when we speak of a recovery now in terms of the EU?
Well, for all the economies in our countries, this is a horrible stress test. Let's be very open about that. I mean, huge losses for companies, and as a reaction, we all are, as national states, try to support our economies as much as we can. We try to support our citizens by all sorts of allocations we are affording. When I look at our German national budget, I mean, without COVID, one wouldn't even be willing to discuss the numbers we are talking about now in terms of new debt and so on. But this is necessary in order to keep our countries running, our economies running, to keep people in employment. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but I think we should not only limit ourselves to restarting what we had, but especially with the support of the new generation EU means, we should use this, see this as an opportunity, which we should use to move our countries, to move the EU ahead, especially in the field of digitalization. And I think we will see a lot in that field in months to come, once we have overcome the fundamental threat of the pandemic, when we will have reached enough herd immunity through vaccination.
Okay, I'll now move on to Minister Abela, and in his introduction, the ambassador mentioned the climate targets and ambitious targets which the EU is setting by 2030. And there's been a lot of discussion about this green transition, and that it is not just an opportunity for our people, but also for the industry and our economies. How do you think is important that at the core of all the decisions that will shape the EU in the coming months, the issue of sustainability should be at the core of all that?
Well, thank you very much, Mandy. Of course, I would like to not only greet Minister Bartolo and His Excellency the German ambassador here, but also all those who are following us on Zoom. Before giving a reply to your question, I would like to say a few things as an introduction, because as you said, a couple of months ago at the very start of the German presidency, we were discussing the challenges and quite an extensive list of what to do. And at each and every, let's say, start of a presidency, we have a lot of expectations and a lot of things that we would like to achieve. Rightly so, even because the country taking the presidency was the largest member state. So maybe even the stakes there were higher. I think that, as His Excellency the Ambassador said, all this had to be done also while dealing with the pandemic. And that was an added burden, difficulty, challenge that we had to face all along in these couple of months. But I think that generally speaking, we have to make all of us, all member states, an effort not to go into a political crisis as well. And at times, I was feeling, and I don't think that I was the only one, that while dealing with the pandemic itself, while dealing with all the topics that are still on our agenda, migration, Brexit, the EU budget, linked with also with the rule of law, at times we were juggling also not to also delve into a political crisis. And I think that is the last thing that the European Union needs at this moment in time when we are dealing for Europe's recovery. And this is the theme of today's discussion as well, together for Europe's recovery. And definitely Europe's recovery means not to lead ourselves into a political crisis as well. That will make things much, much worse. We have still a number of questions that God knows when we will have the answer, Brexit being the first one. Within 15 days or 17 days, we need to know whether, and what will happen, what will be the direction. Hopefully we will have a deal, but everyone is talking about not at all costs. Both sides are talking in that direction. Now, apart from this this point that I wanted to make, you mentioned the sustainability, and I think sustainability needs to be something that goes across all the work of governments of member states. And it is an important theme, not only linked with the environment, but linked with all, with the whole program of what governments need to achieve. Now, even the ambassador made reference to the last European Council, where our leaders reached an agreement on the reduction of at least 55% in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. This in comparison to 1990, of course. It is something which is in the right direction. It's ambitious, so it's good that we also work together on this. We need to be and pay attention to the specificities of each and every country, as also our Prime Minister said during the Council itself. But I think that we have to look at it also from a broader perspective, not only to save our planet and our region as Europeans, because on the issue of climate, it's a global thing, not just a European thing, and it's important that we work together. But also we need to look at it from an opportunity point of view. Definitely to save the planet and ourselves, it's already a very important point that we need to make, but also from the creation of new and better jobs, for example, clean jobs, jobs that possibly even pay better to our workers and families, apart from the health and environmental benefits for our citizens. And of course, also the competitiveness with other regions and with other countries on the global scene when it comes to the EU economy by promoting innovation in green technology. So there are a number of benefits that we need to mention when it comes to this issue that we are seeking to be more ambitious on this area. So we must turn climate and environmental changes, these challenges, into opportunities, basically. And even to convince those who, for a reason or another, are still a bit, let's say, skeptical about going into that direction. So that is why I believe that we should not only mention the environmental gains, the health gains for ourselves and for the planet, but also the possibilities of creating more and better jobs as well. If I can mention one last point when it comes to the budget that we announced a couple of weeks ago for next year. Before, when I was responsible for sustainable development as well, we also did an exercise to see about the 377 measures that the budget for next year and were announced. And let's say that, in fact, 26% of these measures, at least, are concentrated on environmental issues. Now, you will have a number of measures that do not deal only with the environment, but also deal with environment and economy, and also the social aspect at the same time. But I think when we addressed this in our budget, 26% of the measures for sure deal with the environmental measures, while 25% address also the economic development of what was announced. So I think now it's up to us to implement what we said in the budget for next year, keeping in mind that sustainability goes across all work of government. And now we are bound also to pursue the targets, the new targets, at least the 55% that was mentioned in the council as well. So I think that here we have an opportunity, not only to save the environment and our health, but also an opportunity when it comes to new work and investment.
Very good. I'm moving on to another topic, Minister Bartolo. During the past 6 months, we've seen the Commission launch the new pacts on migration and asylum. And the European Commission spoke of, listen, this is a new start. You had perhaps other member states who were a bit more cautious in what results and achievements this pact will result in. Others who outright said this is more of the same. What's your take on it?
A bit of everything. It is a bit of a new start, but there's no indication that we are really addressing the biggest problem, which is what happens with countries like Malta, who are considered the port of first entry, what happens with the asylum seekers there. We haven't solved that through the Valletta Declaration, the Malta Declaration, or the Dublin regulations have not been changed, and there is an appeal to address that, but it's still an appeal. And if anything, COVID-19 has made the situation much more difficult to get 27 countries to agree on a mechanism of solidarity, of how you share around the asylum seekers and refugees. To get coalitions within these different states to agree is a huge challenge. And so far, we haven't done that. Also, what we need to do is to align this pact on migration and asylum, and the post-Cotonou agreement, and the strategy for Africa, to align them together. Because we cannot take a measure in one area without keeping in mind the big picture. I think that there is no magic bullet to solve this complex issue. It's very complex. It is more controversial than it should be, because I think one of the unfortunate realities about migration, whether regular or irregular, is when it becomes an ideological crusade, which has very little to do with reality. So when you have people who simply switch off and start talking about this issue as if it's really catastrophic, when then you see even the numbers are much more manageable than they were 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you see what a big problem it is, because more than a real, I'm not saying that it's not a real problem, but when it becomes symbolic and when it becomes out of all proportion with the real numbers, then it becomes much more difficult to have a rational and reasonable discussion about it. Sometimes I discuss with colleagues from countries where migration is an ideological crusade. Even just mentioning the word migration sets them off into a rant about how their own existence is being threatened, when it's not the case. I mean, so at least we are trying to put it back into a rational debate. It's difficult, but if we're not going to be reasonable, there's no way we are going to approach some kind of practical way of dealing with it. So we still need to do something serious about the solidarity mechanism. And again, I would be the first one to acknowledge that it's very difficult. I was telling the number of people what we had with the Etienne Maersk episode, where we had 27 migrants who were kept on a boat for about 40 days, which is, to put it mildly, very, very difficult in a situation like that. And my Danish colleague telling me Denmark cannot take 27. I told him, so if we were to go by the law of proportionality, how many should Malta take? He said, no, I'm not saying that Malta should take any. No, you shouldn't take any. They should go back to Tunisia, where they were picked up from. So definitely the political mood in the member states is not to show any spirit of generosity. I'm not generalizing, because we do get solidarity and support, for example, from Germany, for us, number one, and from France and a number of other countries. But it's obviously still not enough. I keep on reminding that in 15 years, we managed to relocate only 8% of our arrivals. And I mean, 8%. And we need to tackle this issue on a number of different levels. As we always say, the root causes, that is why I said it's also a matter of trade. It's not just talking about migration when it comes to overseas development. It's talking about trade. If we want sending countries to create jobs and wealth within their countries, we need to give them a fairer framework of trade, that they can actually have manufacturing over there so they can create jobs. We can't simply reward them if they are exporters of primary products, but then create problems for them when they want to sell us their products. We have to decide about that. And then how to help transit countries, and then how to help each other. And over there, the pact, I think, has made considerable progress in the terms of readmission, repatriation, and return programs, where we can help each other to do that. And with those countries, we tell them, listen, let us open a route of regular migration. It's important for you, it's important for us, it's important for the individuals who are involved, so that they will be treated humanely, and take more seriously and cooperate together human trafficking and human smuggling. It's part of international organized crime, and we need to take that, I think, much more seriously. We can proceed on that if we are finding it, and we will continue to find it very difficult to relocate as much as possible. Let us control the number of flows, but then tackle all the other issues. In our case, the situation is much more difficult because we have to deal with Libya, which is still considered an unsafe country, where a lot of pressure has been put on Libya to close their unacceptable detention centers. And I agree that we shouldn't have centers where we keep migrants and then they can be abused and tortured and treated very, very badly. That's not acceptable. But what is the alternative? To turn them out in the streets? That is something where the pact is silent. Having centers in places like Libya and in places in Africa, like we have in Niger and Rwanda, where to process these applications. I know it's not. Some people consider that unacceptable, especially to have centers in Libya. But what is the alternative? And then unless we do that. But I think that the most important point, and the pact, I think, finds the language to do that, and even the post-Cotonou agreement, is to find a language which is addressing at least the concerns, if not giving the solutions, but still talk about these people as human beings, And we must keep on saying, and do something practical about it, that migration, even irregular migration, is not a cause, it's a symptom of other things, like human rights abuses, conflicts, joblessness, poverty, corruption. And we must try to keep all these things in mind when we discuss this difficult issue. At the same time, we know that people mobility is important, not just for the economy, but even for us to live in a civilized way, different cultures, different people coming together, and somehow or other finding a way to live together.
To stay a bit on the subject, and one of the conclusions that there was throughout this presidency is that there was actually a council decision to have a global human rights sanctions regime. And this is probably the first step the European Union is taking to address issues where there are breaches, for example, of human rights on specific individuals and organizations in terms of the instruments the EU has available to it to address these human rights issues. How do you think such decisions will affect the European Union's relationship with perhaps certain third countries?
Well, even within themselves. Yeah. Even within themselves, because what we're doing now is making life more difficult for us in an ethical way, and we should be making life more difficult for us. But now it means that we are creating a standard by which we will be judged, without being very explicit and trying to be as diplomatic as possible. While this agreement was being reached and celebrated in the Foreign Affairs Council, member states were accusing each other of selling arms to countries where human rights are broken and breached. So if I am exporting arms to you and you abuse of the human rights of your citizens, then that is okay. If I'm selling to the ambassador, and if my colleague here is selling to the ambassador, I accuse him of not living up to his standards. So let us be so let us be clear about this. What we're doing is we're creating a framework, which we should, but we're going to be judged by it. And if we are found to be exercising and practicing double standards and imposing these sanctions either very timidly, where it doesn't disturb our vested interests, or we're doing it very selectively, country A, yes, country B, no, because then that becomes a problem. Okay. Something which is so noble can become a stick by which we are...
True, and probably even the reputation of the EU and of how much it can really enforce these kind of rules.
No, but having said this, promoting the culture of human rights is very, very important. It's very, very important. I mean, we have just been celebrating 75 years. We have given up on it. And it's as if we have allowed this concept of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to actually shrink to only patches of the globe. Those are universal. I mean, we must keep on saying that those are universal, that they were actually designed and shaped by people coming from different political systems, different religions, different cultures, and they managed to come up with a very, very good Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we cannot say, no, let's go back, let's reverse on them. And also, please don't talk about it because you're interfering in my internal affairs. No, we shouldn't accept that rhetoric. not to preach and not to be sanctimonious, but human beings are human beings everywhere, wherever they are living and whoever they are. And we shouldn't give up on that. But let us be aware now that we're making, we're putting a lens on us on how to behave.
Okay, something is, and I come back to you, Ambassador, which we've heard a lot over the past 6 months, is the concept of rule of law, and especially the link between the rule of law and European funds. And I think Germany was exceptional in brokering a deal last couple of days and bringing on board Hungary and Poland, which were quite against, and actually at one point even risked stalling the whole process and leaving the EU without a budget for the next few months. How important is it that we now have an agreement and a conclusion to this, and how it will shape also the implementation of the budget in the months to come?
Yes, thank you, Mandy. Well, I can start off where Minister Bartolo left off. If we talk about human rights, rule of law is very close to that concept. And as the EU, we have great differences between our countries in many aspects, but I think the one single characteristic that binds us together is rule of law, that we guarantee fundamental rights to all our citizens, to all people living in our countries. Of course, there's also the connection to migration in that issue. So as a presidency, it was one of our most important goals to achieve agreement on this, because the alternative would have been, number one, very bad psychologically and politically if we had not achieved that. And second, it would have left the two countries that you mentioned out of the new generation EU funding, which would have been very bad for them. And we didn't want to leave anybody behind. The way it has been devised now is such that Poland and Hungary have agreed to the rule of law being incorporated, but they will, in all probability, that's what they've hinted at, take it to the European Court of Justice. The Commission will draft guidelines how, in very practical terms, this rule of law will be safeguarded, executed. And the Commission has made it very clear that in doing so, in drafting these guidelines, they, of course, will take into account the ruling of the European Court of Justice. Now, I think nobody of us can predict what exactly is going to come out of that process, but we have, I think, secured our two goals. Number one, not to step back on the rule of law principle, and on the other hand, of taking all countries aboard. This could have been made much more easy. But again, these two member states were adamant that they wanted a special safeguard, and I think we can be both relieved and a bit proud that in cooperation with all our other partners, we have achieved the solution. And then we have to, I think, again, very much in the sense that Minister Bartolo mentioned, I mean, rule of law is for everybody. And I think in future presidencies and all member states are called upon to make sure that we will uphold this principle. But again, now I think the next logical step, and a very important one with great political and practical meaning and importance, is the ruling of the European Court of Justice that we are not quite sure when we can expect it, but I'm sure it will take some time.
Okay, good. We're speaking a lot, just to even continue on the topic of rights, and something which the German presidency also highlighted during the several events and activities is the issue of workers' rights. And here I ask Minister Rabela, I mean, this whole idea of having a more fair and equal and social Europe. And one of the ideas put forward is perhaps even to have minimum wages, for example, which would be a European framework which would regulate the all across the board minimum wage. How important, or if you think that is one of the solutions, let's put it that way, to really achieve a more fair, equal, and social Europe?
Thanks, Mandy. One proviso that I would like to do is that while during this pandemic, the European Union was much more flexible and relaxed on certain targets, such as the deficit, and other targets that usually, the European Union is very much adamant on. Rightly so, during this pandemic, the European Union allowed member states to go overboard these targets. My issue is that when we start exiting the pandemic, hopefully soon, especially with the vaccine and all the rest, what will be the course of action taken then to start getting in line when it comes to spending, when it comes to reducing the deficit, and other important financial aspects. I'm saying this because what we need to pay attention to is that the first people to be affected with certain elements, as it was in the past, when we refer to the 2008-2009 financial crisis, the people that were most affected were those most in need. So definitely it's not advisable to cut social benefits, because social benefits are directed to those who need them most. And now we're talking about, first, the Work-Life Balance Directive that member states by August 2022 need to implement in our own legislation. That means that we need to spend more as a country, be it the private or public sector, we need to spend more. That is why I started with this proviso, because if we are going into one direction where we need to spend more, then in order to go back to the financial targets, definitely some might suggest that we spend less. And one thing goes against the other, because even the Work-Life Balance Directive, we need to spend more actually to implement it. When it comes to the proposal of the Minimum Wage Directive, first of all, as a matter of principle, we as a country are not against to have the Minimum Wage Directive. Of course, we have some questions when it comes to the technicalities of it, but in principle, we are not against the issue of having a minimum wage in all member states. Now, it doesn't mean that the minimum wage will be at the same level in each and every member state, because one has to keep in mind the specificities of each and every member state. So that will still be determined individually by member states. But we have a situation where some member states have a national minimum wage, other member states have a sectorial minimum wage, and other member states do not have a minimum wage at all. So we are trying to move to a situation where everyone accepts to have some kind of a minimum wage. Now, in Malta, we adopted the minimum wage in 1974. So definitely we have a history of this. And that is why I said we are not against having a minimum wage. Because here we're talking about decent living for our workers, and possibly to have an adequate minimum wage hopefully will guarantee a decent living. So even from, let's say, a socially point of view, it makes a lot of sense to have an adequate also minimum wage. Other benefits can be that of, from a wider economic perspective, that it can reduce inequalities, mainly financial ones, because we're talking about a minimum wage, which basically deals with the issue of finance. But also another element can be that of to sustain domestic demands, and also to strengthen incentives within a competitive work environment. So these are things that, as we see this proposal, these are some of the benefits that this can bring. On a lesser level then, minimum wages can also help reduce the gender pay gap. As more women than men earn a minimum wage. So basically, if member states adopt and agree on to have a minimum wage, these are some of the benefits across Europe. I'm talking not only here in Malta, because we already have a minimum wage. And also the proposal sets or intends to propose and to have a mechanism where minimum wages can be reviewed. In Malta, we will have also what we refer to the low wage commission. This basically was proposed in a social pact in April 2017, where at the time we had increased the minimum wage and also proposed this low wage commission with the intention to have a revision every now and then. In fact, the first report, according to that pact, will be delivered to the Prime Minister by 2023. So basically now we are working to even set up legally a legal base for the low wage commission. Hopefully we'll manage to do that by end this year, or let's say beginning of next year. It depends on certain meetings that still needs to occur. So I think that these are some of the advantages that we need to look at. Even the proposed, let's say, directive sort of takes measures to further also and increase the coverage of collective bargaining, which means that collectively unions can negotiate with employers when it comes to collective bargaining. So therefore, it pushes workers, or rather, let's say, wishes that workers join a union to be represented, and then also for collective bargaining to happen more widely and to increase the workers' participation in unions. When it comes, I see, and this is my last point now, when it comes to social dialogue, which is a very important element in all this, I think that even from the past few months, from a local perspective, I see that social dialogue was and still is very much important for government to take certain decisions. The measures that we took were taken also after consultation collectively, but also individually with social partners, those who represent the workers and those who represent the employers. Even when discussing the minimum wage proposal, also social dialogue need to happen. And actually, we already started discussing this in the Employment Relations Board, even this week. Actually, it was discussed in order to have all the views about this proposal, and of course, then collectively we can speak at the European level on what should be the way forward on this proposed directive as well.
When this is a question perhaps which we can discuss together, because it would be interesting to see a bit your views. I mean, we speak of migration, human rights regime, wages, the budget, which ultimately is a reflection on projects we see, etc. And there seems to be the importance of, at the core of all this, there's the citizen. How important do you see to constantly have the citizen mind? That is, whatever we do in all the decisions and all these topics, the ultimate goal is just to improve the lives of citizens, but also to involve them in the discussions and the debates that there are on these topics. I can start from you, Minister.
It's nice to remember that when we conduct politics, people matter. I think it's important. Yes, very much so, and in every area. And I think especially even when it comes to something which I'm I don't know, I'm still a newcomer to this area, so I am allowed to say things which perhaps are not, shouldn't be said. But my impression is that as foreign affairs ministers and in diplomacy, it's as if, on the whole, we, and I'm saying it on a global level, I'm not just saying European, or it's as if we are allowing too much ground to the defense ministers and to the arms industry. My feeling is that, and I wasn't aware of this before, it's only in recent months that I've started to look at it deeper. Whereas before, I'm generalizing, whereas when we've had very serious crisis, we look at diplomacy. We don't always do this. And then when diplomacy fails, that the guns start to talk. It's as if now we're reaching for the guns sooner rather than later. And if not for the guns actually to use them, but to produce them and to sell them. I see a worrying militarization of foreign policy, which comes from something deep. It's not sort of the goodies and the baddies and the... If you have countries where the most productive and profitable exports are arms, and especially if you look at the component of state intervention in these arms industries, it's quite interesting to see the relationship between the need to have jobs, thousands of jobs, and at the same time to gain and earn income for your country. If you sell wine, you do it with wine. If you do it with arms, you do it with arms. And there are countries where the most efficient, modernized section of their economy is actually arms exports. Now that complicates matters, because then it's in your interest to create markets for your products. And one way of creating markets is not necessarily to declare war, but to have tension where you say, listen, it's important to have arms to be ready. For example, in our case, we have very difficult months ahead where things can get worse. What's going to happen in the Eastern Mediterranean? What's going to happen in the relationship between Turkey, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Egypt? What's going to happen there? Because sometimes you have colleagues who tell us, oh, don't worry, now the situation is different to 2015 or 2016. But it's difficult also because there was a difficult compromise reached and an agreement with Turkey reached to see what happens on the eastern side. And if things become more tense over there, they become tense not just for Greece and Cyprus, they become tense for everyone. What's going to happen in Libya? Are things going to get better or are they going to get worse? I've just come back from Libya and I'm very worried that the situation is actually more fragile than a month ago. What's going to happen in Africa? We've seen what happened in Ethiopia and in other countries, and Morocco and Tunisia, and Algeria as well. So the months ahead depend a lot on what is happening on our doorstep, and all these, whether it's the state of the economy, peace, human rights, conflicts. It all depends on this big picture, and I think now it's very important that as a European Union, we try to find ways of being very, very. Not to mention, obviously, Georgia, Belarus. I mean, it's just I'm being very provincial now, just thinking of down here in the south. Also because we tend, wherever we are, we tend to focus on our immediate neighborhood. But we have some tough months ahead, and we need to see what we can do together. One thing which is an illusion, and we'd better get away from it, is not to think of Joe Biden as a miracle worker, because the expectations that there are on this new administration coming in, when it has quite a lot to do at home,
And catch up with.
and then to expect also the new administration to solve like treating Chancellor Merkel as a miracle worker.
Yeah.
You know, she's done and she's doing a wonderful role in her leadership positions. But we all need to do our bit to see how we can turn the corner at a time when we have to reimagine and reinvent our economies and our society as well. Because with post-COVID, whatever the vaccination is going to, or the vaccinations are going to bring to us, we have to reimagine and recreate our economies and our society, every area of life, whether it's the economy, whether it's education, health, everything. So we have quite a lot to do.
Something else which I want to mention, but perhaps we see if we have any questions, because I am aware that there are a number of partisans who might want. They have? No, there aren't. Okay. So one topic which, before I also introduce the ambassador of Portugal and Slovenia, which I want to discuss with you, is Brexit. I try to leave it to the end, but it's something that keeps coming up time and time again. Whenever we discussed this 6 months ago, we're discussing it again. But I think you all mentioned in your interventions that time is really running out now, and possibly start January, there won't be a deal between the UK and the EU. Will we ever see an end in sight to the saga, or because I'm getting the almost impression we won't?
I'm quite willing also to deal with the impossible questions here. As we all know, as we are sitting here talking, the negotiations are going on. And of course, I have no direct insight, but apparently there still is a small chance of success. I think it's very small, but apparently there still is some hope. And we are very much dedicated to finding a last-minute solution to avoid a hard Brexit. Brexit, even if it's a soft Brexit, if we still find a solution, an agreement, especially in terms of level playing field and the fishing industry, will be difficult enough to master. And if it's a hard Brexit, it's worse, and it will be the continental European economy suffering, but even more the British economy. And let me say that again, because there's also a certain amount of finger pointing involved in this whole thing. We remain committed to respecting a democratic decision which has been made in the United Kingdom. When in brackets, when I talk to British citizens, many of them tell me, well, we just wanted to teach the EU a lesson, and we were quite shocked when we got to Brexit. So, but I'm not going to elaborate on that. And the second very important point for me is, and I take this very personally, Britain has been and will remain a European country, in a certain way politically at the heart of Europe, a very important trusted partner, and that's not going to change. But especially on the economic side, I'm not betraying a secret when I say hard times are ahead. And if it's a hard Brexit, looking at the way under the EU, how far the British and the remaining EU economies have been intertwined, to cut all these very tight links artificially and replace them by WTO roles throws us back for many, many decades. And that, I think, is very sad. And again, it's compounded, of course, by COVID. And I think we have all seen it on the news. There's going to be huge queues of trucks on the British side and probably also on the European side. It's mind-boggling to imagine that from a state where trucks would just drive through or through the tunnel or across a ferry would have to stop and start filling in documents. Excuse me, this is almost not even 20th, but almost 19th century. And this is what we are looking at. And I do hope, and I'm 100% sure, I think we all are, of what Michel Barnier has been doing. We 100% trust him. He has a full mandate from us, from all of us in the EU. We hope that the British are negotiating with the same mindset. Not to, when I hear that there was public domain in Britain said, yes, we're going to send in the Royal Navy to protect our fishing rights. And of course, it was denied by the Royal Navy. But what kind of mindset is that? There's so much to lose. And so let's all keep our fingers crossed. I mean, basically negotiations, we were cautiously optimistic when our presidency started. And as you said, Mandy, in July, we were cautiously optimistic. We haven't managed to arrive at where we wanted to be, but still there's a few days left, and let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's do whatever we can individually to promote a constructive solution. Unfortunately, that's the only thing I can say.
Good. I think given the situation is quite a reasonable answer, because even the way things have been progressing, they've been changing. With one day we're hoping, and then the next day it's a bit so yes, we'll hope for that. I don't know if there are any questions from whoever is participating through Zoom and would like to perhaps join the discussion. If not, I would like to invite the ambassador of Portugal and Slovenia, because as we've said, Portugal and Slovenia will take on the presidency from where Germany would have left off. And Ambassador, first of all, thank you for accepting our invitation. And I'll leave it to you to, I mean, Minister Bartolo already spoke about a few difficult months ahead. So I'm not sure what's your perspective.
Thank you very much. I hope you are hearing me. It's an honor to be here in this panel with Ministers Bartolo and Abela. Congratulations to Germany, colleague Walter Hassmann, for their many achievements. And of course, the success of the Portuguese presidency, or for that matter, the success of Europe, always depends on the success of a German presidency, and also on the constant and continued support of the trio of presidencies, also my colleague from Slovenia. So I would say that the omens are good. It's a pity, of course, that Portugal does not have currently a resident ambassador or a permanent diplomatic presence in Valletta, but those are also the fruits of austerity and of unfortunate decisions of the recent past, to which Minister Abela rightly referred. My only advantage here in my office is that since I'm alone, I don't have to wear a mask, but it's a slight advantage. Anyway, I intend to show, of course, the EU presidency's flag as often as possible in Malta from the 1st of January, being it understood that with the Treaty of Lisbon, many decisions, many agendas, the convening and even the chairmanship of so many summits or high-level meetings depend on new structures. We will have a difficult semester, I would say, event-driven semester, conditioned by circumstances. I will, of course, spare you to priorities. We have a common program with the trio of presidencies, 31 pages. We will also have, of course, within this trio of presidencies program, our own priorities, but under the motto of time to deliver, because it's really time to deliver to our citizens and our countries. But I would say that the next 6 months should be dedicated first and foremost to defeating the virus. We sometimes speak as if we were living in another era, but numbers are here to remind us that we have not yet defeated the virus. And I would say that this would be our first priority as citizens, as countries, as European Union. And of course, work for recovery. And thanks to the German presidency, we are starting from a good basis on that. And then, of course, we'll have the social Europe as a specific focus of the Portuguese presidency, with a social summit to be held in the city of Porto in May, presentially, hopefully. And I'm very grateful for Minister Abela for what he said about all this social dimension, which is very dear to our heart. And it's very good that Malta will be certainly a like-minded country of the presidency in this matter, in this very important matter. And even more important, since Malta is on the average a rich European country, Malta has a GDP per capita which is 99% of the EU average. So Malta is in a perfect position to influence from an equidistant point of view these very important debates on the social dimension, because of course we will not even manage to recover if we do not reinforce the European social model, if we do not mitigate the effects of unemployment, if we do not fight poverty, social exclusion, and inequality. And by the way, it's something that Malta always managed to do, although Malta does not have natural resources, no oil, no gas, no land borders, and still Malta is on the average of European Union prosperity. And that's something that we should keep in mind. And we will draw on Malta's experience also to ensure the collective European success of this dimension. But Malta is also, and I'm talking about Malta because it will be a very good example for the presidency, and the Minister Bartolo, with whom I share the same surname, you know my constant position on this. Malta is a country that sets an example and exerts relevant influence in so many areas that will be a focus of the Portuguese presidency. Irregular migration and asylum is a case in point, and you have already mentioned that. In general, the situation in the Mediterranean, Malta's consistency on issues of international justice, and I noted Minister Bartolo's very recent statement, for instance, on the Western Sahara or on the Palestinian issue. And I must say that from my personal point of view, I'm not speaking as a future presidency, whatever that means, but from my personal point of view, Malta's specificities, Minister Abella mentioned Malta's specificities. And I would say even Malta's neutrality are a strength and asset for the EU, and something that contributes to a greater balance and more reasonable attitudes and perhaps more informed and wiser decisions. And that's what we will really need during these next 6 months in this, as I say, event-driven presidency, very much conditioned by circumstances. And it's good also to hear Minister Bartolo speak about the dilemma between weapons and wine. As you may know, and as you may realize, Portugal is more about wine than about weapons, but I'm pretty sure that I understand you, Minister Bartolo, when I read a few days ago the latest report from this Swedish CIPRI about the global business of weapons, and it's very important that you raise that also in the context of this integral attitude vis-à-vis the global south, because I'm afraid that there are more exports of weapons to the global south than a development cooperation given to them, and this has a direct or indirect effect on issues that are so important for us, like migration and asylum. So this is what I would have to say about our main priorities: recovery, social Europe, a more global Europe, and of course, a green and digital Europe. But I will spare you the details, and we will try to give continuity to the excellent German presidency. And I'm very happy and confident that I will be counting, my country will be counting on the support of Malta. Thank you from Rome.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before we perhaps deal with this question, because someone actually wrote a question and it deals with migration, so perhaps Minister Bartolo can address it later on. But before that, I invite now His Excellency, the Ambassador for the Republic of Slovenia, to perhaps give us his remarks, obviously because Slovenia will take over from Portugal for the second half of 2021. Ambassador, welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Our trio has taken over the presidency of the Council of the EU in almost unprecedented times of global health crisis, which has affected the societies and the economies of EU member states and changed our everyday lives in an almost dramatic way. This is why I would like, first of all, to thank my German colleague, Walter, for the many measures undertaken under the German presidency to address the challenging COVID situation, especially in terms of controlling the pandemics. However, a lot more will remain to be done. Slovenia will take over the EU Council presidency in the second semester of 2021 and is currently preparing its 6-month national presidency program. We are looking forward to its second presidency of the EU Council together in a team with our trio partners, Germany and Portugal, as it was also in 2000, at the end of 2007 and 2008. During our presidency to the Council of the EU, Slovenia intends to focus on strengthening the resilience of the European Union, strengthening the economic renewal of the European Union based on the digital and green transition, strengthening the Union based on the rule of law and maintaining the European way of life, and a secure European Union as a reliable and good partner in the neighborhood and the world. Taking into account the new reality, the first and one of the Slovenia's main goals will be to contribute to the building of a stronger and more resilient European Union. We believe that it is necessary to continue building on the experience gained with pandemics. One of the most important lessons learned in 2020 is that the EU needs to be able to deal more effectively with crisis situations which by nature or scale exceed the capabilities of individual member states, and the EU response is therefore needed. To protect the EU citizens from all kinds of crises during our presidency, Slovenia would like to focus on a comprehensive approach in the case of pandemic and various forms of modern security threats, such as large-scale cyber attacks and intentional spread of disinformation and untruth for the pursuit of political goals. The migration crisis does not seem to be coming to an end. This is why we need to find permanent solutions, including functioning and crisis-proof asylum system. Urgent, coordinated, and wide-ranging action is needed in these cases. To get Europe's societies and economies back to full functioning, the Slovenian presidency will work towards the economic recovery of the European Union based on the green and digital transition. Building on the work of Portugal, we will aim to establish the digital sovereignty of the European Union. We plan to principally focus on ethically based artificial intelligence, which is becoming more and more important for our jobs, health, cities and countryside and elsewhere. The green, which is the catchphrase of our presidency preparations, signals that we will stick to the principle of green and sustainable development and as a recurring theme of our program. In this regard, we will remain committed to the EU's objectives by 2030 and 2050 to achieve climate neutral Europe. Another area of importance is the protection of the EU's founding values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, and maintaining our European way of life. This priority will likely feature further work on the asylum and migration package introduced by the European Commission in September and for the return to the full functioning of Schengen. During our presidency, the Conference of the Future of Europe will be important. We hope that it will start as soon as possible and run as planned until the beginning of 2022. It aims to bring the European institutions and their decision-making bodies closer to citizens and to strengthen the bond between European nations. The conference should deliver concrete results for EU citizens and should contribute to our policies so that we can better tackle current and future challenges. Among the foreign policies, Slovenia will pay special attention to the Western Balkans and the continuation of the process of enlargement. We will continue to pay attention to the socio-economic recovery of the region, connected with it on our green and digital transitions, and foster a better European perspective for youth. We will strive for a secure European Union, which will be a reliable and good partner in the neighborhood and the world. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear ministers, Bartolo and Abela, Walter, Pedro, dear fellow ambassadors, this is just my short introduction into the presidents to come in about 6 months and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your intervention. Before we go to, because I am aware that the Ambassador to Lithuania would also like to intervene. Perhaps, I don't know, Mr. Bartolo, if you want to comment on the comment from Luis Vella I mean, he's speaking about, I think, burden sharing and the idea of more responsibility of all member states when dealing with migration. We already spoke at length about it. But
That's the point, that actually his question is still a question that needs to be answered.
yes,
Not by me, but by everyone.
exactly. Thank you. Ambassador,
Hello.
hi.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to join everyone thanking German presidency for excellent job. And I can imagine how it was difficult to manage all presidency during all consequences and circumstances we have had and still having. And also I would like to wish all success to my colleagues Pedro and Tomas for Portuguese and Slovenian presidency. No, I wish all the best. It will be not easy task as for German presidency, but I hope all together we will manage. And thank you for Ministers Abel and Bartolo for your availability. And I would like to come back to the topic Minister Bartolo touched on human rights. Sometimes when we are in Europe, when talking about human rights or violation of human rights, we think it's happening somewhere far away from our homes. When you're in Vilnius, it's happening 24 kilometers away from your home. I'm talking about Belarus. And when you're talking about migration and asylum seekers, Lithuania already has accepted almost 1,000 Belarusians who arrived to Lithuania as refugees or asylum seekers. And everything what's going on in this country, we perfectly know. My question is, let's say, can we consider Belarus or our reaction, our EU reaction to events in Belarus, kind of test or exam for European Union? For, really ability to take decisions. Have we passed this exam or have we failed? My question is to our Maltese guest, to Minister Bartolo. Let's think about what we have done on Belarus. That is success from our point of view. Were we able to do something more? Measures we have taken are sufficient, and looking to the future, what could happen in the future on Belarus, in Belarus, and how EU could act dealing with everything going on in and around Belarus. Thank you so much.
I was hoping that Walter would answer this. It's a good question, and I think it ties also what we were saying before about the role of diplomacy. But again, I wouldn't see it only just EU and Belarus, but also our relationship with Russia. And I think that is these are issues that we need to really address. How are we going to engage with countries like China, like Russia, like Turkey, like Iran? Should we, because sometimes when we say, let's negotiate, let's patiently and persevere in engaging these countries and discuss with them, we are accused, those of us who speak this language are accused of being naive and soft. I do not agree. I think that even if we are discussing whoever the other part is, if we go straight away for confrontation and for punishment, we are going to make it much more difficult. I feel that there were moments in our history now, as I'm talking now about in general, where serious crises were solved because no side tried to humiliate the other side, or no side said, there's no way we can talk, we will either fight or one of us has to give in. I think we need more patient and persevering diplomacy. Yes, let's be firm, but I think we need to engage with everyone, with every country, and patiently try. Compromise is difficult. Compromise is painful. But in today's world, the alternative is much more painful. And I think we might as well go for the less painful alternative, which is compromise and finding a way where we can take our interests together. We've become such an interconnected world where everything is connected to everyone else and every area is connected, that there is no other way to diplomacy and patient and persevering negotiation.
Thank you, Minister Bartolo. I am aware that both the ambassador and Minister Abela would like to comment on this. And perhaps because also we're reaching the end of this discussion, you can also conclude so that we can then wrap up.
My colleague, Mr. Bartolo, first mentioned the defense ministers and, of course, he himself being a foreign minister. I had the pleasure of serving in both ministries. Now I am in a maybe better position than Minister Bartolo because maybe I can speak a bit more freely about that. The issue is what comes first, in my opinion. You mentioned citizens first. I mean, it's good that we remind ourselves that we are in politics or we are providing a service because we represent our people, we represent our countries. When we discuss the issues at stake, from which point of view are we going to see that particular issue? When we had the presidency in way back the first half of 2017, I was Minister for Home Affairs and National Security, so Home Affairs and Defense. I also had suggested to have a joint council between Foreign Affairs and Defense ministers. I must say that it was received a bit in a skeptical way, but then the way it turned out to be, it was I think a good. We had a good discussion, Foreign Affairs ministers and Defense ministers, and the thinking was that we should continue in that direction. This maybe answers a bit whether we should look for diplomacy more or for conflicts to be resolved in some other way. I never believed that any conflict should be solved with armaments. Now, when we, as Europeans or as European Union, we decide to go in one direction, we should not make some kind of either excuses or we allow for some things to happen. So if we want to go for diplomacy and for diplomacy to prevail, then we should stop exporting armaments. Otherwise, we are not inconsistent in our arguments, because around the table we say that we need diplomacy to prevail, but then because we are talking about massive industry, some other interests might be more overarching than the role of diplomacy. When it comes to the question by the Lithuanian ambassador, I believe, and I always believed, that the European Union should have a bigger role, especially in the region. My colleague, Minister Bartolo, referred to the new US administration, and I think this should also open our eyes as Europeans, that we should take a more of a leadership role in the world today, especially in our region, because otherwise we'll have more conflicts, be it in the south and to the east or to the north of Europe, that we have to deal with. For example, the Balkans is one other region that is in the very heart of Europe. It's not the periphery of Europe, it's in the very heart of Europe. So if we are expecting someone else to do something for the Balkans rather than we as Europeans, as European Union, we do more for the Balkans, we will soon end up with having a major conflict or a possibility of a major conflict, at least in one of the major countries in the Balkans, exactly in the heart of Europe. So I think it's a question of leadership. It's a question also of the European Union to be more relevant in the international scene, not only within member states. I'm referring here to what happens in our neighborhood, whether it's the South, where we as a country have a major interest. But of course, what happens in different regions is of concern to us, because at some point or another, we are going to be affected directly or indirectly as well. So I always stress this point, and I still believe very much in this, that it depends on us to take a leadership role, and hopefully one day we will say that Europe is doing that. And from my own experience, other countries and regions want Europe to be more active internationally because they believe in us. They see that we have ideals that, you know, we mentioned the rule of law, we mentioned democracy and other things. They look at us for those as well, and I think we have a major role to play also internationally.
Thank you, Minister. Ambassador, maybe you can conclude.
Well, with the topics of arms, of international cooperation, my heart is full, but I'll try to be as brief as possible, so not as to overstretch anybody's patience. Number one, we haven't mentioned it in our discussion so far, but now, Minister Abila, and thank you for that, you mentioned it. European external action has to be stronger and more effective. I think that's absolutely right, because we are surrounded by areas, I mean, starting in Belarus, and Minister, you mentioned the Eastern Mediterranean, Libya, Africa. Now we have new conflicts, or no, a flare-up of an old conflict in the Caucasus. So yes, we have to get better there. As far as the relationship with the international military side is concerned, let me put it like this. I think we have also achieved a few things in our presidency as far as NATO-EU cooperation is concerned, not in the sense of militarization of foreign politics, exactly the opposite. And I'm grateful. I understand how difficult some of this is for Malta because of the neutrality stipulated by the Constitution. But I hope also during the last days now of the presidency, we can get a few steps ahead in that field. But in parallel to our presidency, and even before the presidency, we initiated the initiative for multilateralism, and we were very grateful that Malta joined it, because our impression was and is that we have to strengthen again multilateralism, because we have seen, unfortunately, in the last few years, the bilateralization of international relations, which is very dangerous, and which then encourages, for example, arms deals on a bilateral level without any transparency. So we remain committed to the principle of multilateralism. We invite everybody globally to share it, to participate, and of course then, as a logical consequence, to strengthen again the role of the United Nations, which has been much stronger in the past, and we very much regret that we had certain setbacks in recent times. And then of course, when we talk about arms, we should also look at the sort of the level of arms we don't discuss very much in Europe, but that's the strategic arms, and we very much regretted that a few agreements have been cancelled from one side. And I would also like to mention that JCPOA, the agreement with Iran on nuclear weapons, I think, and that's of course a big hope, even if nobody's going to work miracles, that from end of January with the new US administration, we can pick up where we left off 4 years ago, basically. And so this was the first block, and now if you expect me to conclude, is that?
Yeah, we can wrap up.
So now a big hiatus, and back to our presidency for at least for me, for the last time. If I may compare the European Union to a train, I was tempted to say, I think with the help of our partners, we have managed to put more coal or enough coal into the locomotive. But I realize with the Green Deal, let's say
Not a good idea.
we put more green electricity into the electric, or even some
better.
hydrogen into the very modern locomotive developed with European technology, let me put it like this, to keep the train moving. And while I think the wheels and the brakes have been screeching a few times during our presidency, and the carriage has been swaying dangerously, we have managed to keep the train on track and moving. And I wish all the very best to our Portuguese and then later the Slovenian colleagues to take over control of the train and keep it running in the right direction. And we will all help, I think, in the best of European solidarities to make that a success.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was a very fitting conclusion to our discussion. I would really like to thank as well Minister Abela and Minister Bartolo for joining us, all the ambassadors who are following us online, including Facebook and Zoom. We really came to an end to this very interesting discussion. I think it's also the last event that MUSEC will be organizing this year. We organized a lot, so so thank you very much. But I would really like to thank everyone, all our stakeholders who, without them, it wouldn't have been possible to have such interesting discussions and the debates throughout this year. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.